And welcome everyone. Our session this afternoon is on the building network. We're going to be talking about setting the right foundation for data collection, security, and performance. So the first thing I want to do is recognize our esteemed panelists for the session and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So we've got Jason Elliott from Nokia, Ron Victor from Iodium, Joe Gaspardoni from Montgomery Technologies, and Greg Sprates from Extenet Networks. So Joe, let's kick off with you.
Sure. Joe Gaspardoni, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Montgomery Technologies. Montgomery is a national provider of two things. There's a riser management division, and then there's a enterprise class secure network division. So we both do riser management and as a separate service install secure networks. I'm celebrating my 30th year, can't believe I'm saying that, in commercial real estate, in both technology and on the operations side. So some people say I'm a little bit of a unicorn when it comes to that, because I actually have been an asset manager, property manager, so I know both sides of the equation.
Great, glad to have with us today, Joe. Let's go to Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason Elliott. I'm the head of cross-portfolio solutions and partners marketing at Nokia. So Nokia provides a full range of connectivity solutions for both service providers and enterprises as well, both wireless and wireline access technologies, as well as other infrastructure and software components to support virtualization and migration to cloud.
Great, glad to have you with us, Jason. And Greg.
Hey, Greg Sprates here. Thanks for having me on the call from Extenet Systems. I run the real estate business unit of the company. We're an infrastructure provider for primarily mobile network operators. We do outdoor small cells. We do in-building infrastructure. We also have an enterprise division as well that actually sells to the tenants. So we've got metro fiber footprints in many large metro markets, and a lot of small cells and indoor systems for cellular coverage. And we partner with some of the folks on the call here. So it's going to be a real interesting call today. So look forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And Ron Victor.
Hi, thanks, Darlene. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you. My name is Ron Victor. I am the CEO of Iodium. We provide converged IT infrastructure as a managed service to the building automation world for data acquisition from building automation systems, lighting control systems, the elevator control systems. We're doing all of that very securely, managing third-party remote access for technicians to come back into the buildings from a cloud-based methodology such that the technician's laptop gets air-gapped, and of course, deploying all kinds of edge applications for smart buildings, digital twins, analytics applications, AI, ML models. Typical customer base, large REITs, large enterprises, entire portfolio of skyscrapers. We've got about 1,200 skyscrapers under contract right now, adding about 150 to 200 every quarter. Thank you, Darlene.
Great. So just to set the foundation for our conversation today, we're going to be talking about the building network. Now, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with networks. We've got enterprise networks, we've got commercial networks, we've got wireless networks, we've got networks all around us. And if you look at a traditional building, most of those networks are independent of each other. There's the HVAC network, the lighting network, the access control network, the enterprise networks, the Wi-Fi networks. So we've got all these different networks going on in the buildings, in some cases conflicting networks. So what we want to talk about today is the value of having a single converged building network, and what that looks like and what the benefits and the ROI of that type of approach is. So I want to start with Joe. Joe, having been in the industry, as you mentioned, for 30 years, I don't know if that's a unicorn and again, I'm going to put myself in that same bucket because I've been doing this for about 30 years as well. It's either a unicorn or a dinosaur at this point.
Yeah, right.
But talk to us about the evolution that you've seen over the last 30 years from kind of the initial telecom broadband to in-building wireless to now where we are with smart buildings and fully converged networks. So tell us a little bit about that transformation you've seen.
It's a great point, or a great start point. So we really are, at different points during the dot-com bubble and at other points during the past 30 years, there's been a lot of talk about being in a paradigm shift. But we can really, truly say that as of now, we actually are in a paradigm shift. In the early days, in the mid 90s, when everybody was still using DOS software, that was technology. The BMS wasn't thought of as technology. It was a thing. It was like a refrigerator. And as you move forward through the mid to late 90s, there was really a move and a thought that maybe we can go into this web-based software. And as we all know, a lot of that crashed and burned, and there were a lot of bodies scattered after the dot-com bust. And that took a while to dig out of from the perception of commercial real estate, because it is such a slow moving, careful moving industry. So we really, what's sort of pushing that forward now is this move from systems that are really, not connected to connection. And we sometimes call that IP or IP addresses that are driving that. Sometimes it's related to bandwidth. But the truth is that every new system that's getting installed or upgraded has got some kind of connectivity to the outside world. And so when you see that happening across 30, 35, 40 different types of systems, you really are in a paradigm shift. And that's where we are today, is we're just starting that kind of wave of movement into this connected world.
Yeah, so Jason, from a Nokia standpoint, what have you seen in terms of the evolution of not just systems, but connectivity, data? What have you seen over the last 10 years or so in terms of that evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've learned a lot in terms of cellular communication, moving from voice to small data systems, to record sensors and everything, to video communications, video being very prevalent today. Obviously, there's been a proliferation of different types of wireless technologies and standards, so from Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi, all those other different types of technology. What we've seen now more and more is the cost of cellular technology continues to drop because of the global ubiquity of this technology now. So as we've got to 4G, we can see that standardization has really dropped the cost of this technology overall. And now as we start to move into 5G, we can see some additional capabilities as well that we would never have really thought possible with cellular communications, in terms of the reliability, the security, the amount of connectivity that we can have as well. And now, because we can do a lot of this control functionality, and the way you deploy network systems can be virtualized into the cloud, we can start to simplify these access deployments. So typically you think of 4G and 5G network in terms of big communications networks and being very complex to manage, but that's not really the case now. We've got to such a level of maturity in the industry now where we can produce networks that are just in a box, hosted cloud solutions, networks that are kind of in small access points, small cells that can be installed indoors. So not just like a traditional DAS system, but actually small cellular access points that look like Wi-Fi access points, that physical, the same form factor, but they're actual cellular networks as well. So you start to get the benefits, the security, the reliability of cellular access technology inside of buildings. And that really does allow you to kind of open up a lot more options in terms of what you're doing inside the business. And then also when you move from building to building as well. So think about like campus type environments as well. And that's very key going forward.
So Greg, from your standpoint, what do you see are kind of the fundamental components of that building network? Like, what are the first things that you would do to kind of start off and start to build that network?
Yeah, it's it's interesting because historically it was copper, then it went to Ethernet or whatever, and then some form of fiber connectivity, Wi-Fi, and now a lot of the systems that you mentioned earlier and what's been talked about on the call here now are embedded with some form of a wireless connectivity, whether that's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, CBRS, etc. So, but it all comes back to fiber at some point or another. It has to get off the spectrum. The latency issues and other things like that derive all that. But what we've seen lately is in one of the areas where we invest in infrastructure in commercial real estate primarily as an owner's advocate or a building owner's advocate is as we're assessing the building and looking at that and having a conversation with the building owner about what all the needs are. And we're looking to put fiber infrastructure in the riser system. And then long-term manage that and monetize that with the building owner and make it available to not only the building owner, but also to anybody who comes in there and needs connectivity, whether that be to the roof or whether that be to one of the various systems. It's a unified fiber network is what we're looking at that's very robust, can go vertically and horizontally. And then we also wrap in the rooftop and the meeting room there as well for full connectivity and then out to the street. So what we're seeing is a paradigm shift with regards to COVID reentry and all the new applications that are driving that. But at the same time, a reduction in ways they can reduce their OpEx and maybe have somebody kind of outsource that and manage that entire process with all the different service providers that come into the building. So we have a little bit of a different approach there, but we make that infrastructure available to literally anybody who needs it. We don't build it ourselves. We would partner with a Montgomery or somebody else there to actually install that infrastructure and work with us on a long-term basis. But we would actually go out there and try and monetize that and manage that on behalf of the building owner and work with them for tenant experience, for safety, and addressing all of these things. So that's what we're seeing right now. Is a lot of it is about focusing on reentry, all new kinds of platforms that we never thought about before, touchless, et cetera.
So I think one of the things I'm hearing in common, there may be a lot of different networks in the building. You've got your communications networks, you've got your enterprise, your corporate networks, you've also got your building networks. And so Ron, why don't we talk a little bit about, I know you like to talk about IT versus OT. And, in terms of creating a single converged building network, it's really taking traditional operational technologies and putting an IT overlay on that. And it's a little bit different when you talk about a paradigm shift. It's a huge paradigm shift from traditional building operations into kind of that IT overlay. So talk to us a little bit about the IT versus OT, or in this instance, maybe IT plus OT, and why is that important in terms of looking at putting together a converged building network?
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, let's make it IT with OT, right? I mean, the IT versus OT has to somehow blend and become IT with OT. And that's what we've been focused on for 5.5 years. Darlene, we brought a bunch of folks out of Cisco, Juniper, Qualcomm, Wind River, and SafeNet who didn't know what BACnet meant. And we said, wait a minute, we're going to solve that problem of bringing a converged network into a building. And with 3 fundamental philosophies, right? If you look at it, the number 1 is security, cyber. If the building is going to be connected, how do you protect all the assets in the building with a single pane of glass, make sure nothing is visible on showdown, make sure the access is limited to them that need access. Technician laptops are air gapped so that they don't, you never know. One thing all of us can never protect is somebody clicking on a phishing or a malware attack. So you never want a technician's laptop to touch your building network. Along with that comes what Greg just mentioned and what you mentioned about all the return to work applications, digital twins, etc. When you're bringing all of this together, you can't afford to have in a building 100 gateways from 100 different software providers. This is my gateway for counting people. This is my gateway for temperature monitoring. This is my gateway for filtering. You need a single substrate, which is a single edge computer, completely patch managed and secure, with all of these applications being run as containers, completely orchestrated from the cloud. And that what that means is now from security, you now go to future proofing. I can deploy any application from any vendor at any time, take data anywhere. All, whether my network is converged or not converged, whether I've segmented or not segmented. And the overlay you mentioned allows you to segment networks, right? Even if you have it would be in the ideal world, right? The ideal world is let's put a complete separate operation technology network. Great. Most likely the CFO is going to cancel that and say nothing doing. I don't have the budget for that. So now you got to use what you've got and use overlay technologies to segment it. The last thing in this I would like to point out is, okay, so we're going to do all this great stuff. Now you got to make it very easily deployable. The deployment complexity has to go away. If you're going to have large IT teams, go in planes, trains, and automobiles to buildings to configure, maintain, manage all of these networks, it's an absolute, the OpEx is horrendous. So you need to figure out these things, deployment complexity, security, virtualization for future-proofing edge compute. And if you have the budget for a complete isolated building network, more power to you, wonderful. But if not, there are virtualization and segmentation and overlay technologies today that can provide you that same kind of segmented functionality to be able to allow you to do that. And it's very critical to do it.
So let's take a couple steps back, because I think when you start looking at the architecture and all the different devices and systems and data and cloud and everything that goes together to make this work, it gets really, really complicated. So let's kind of take it back to a business standpoint and talk about use cases first. You know, what are the use cases for converged network? And so, Jason, I'm going to start with you. You know, what are some of the use cases that Nokia supports by having that network in the building?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. We've been looking at you know, a lot of activities in terms of looking at building sensor-based systems as well. So we have a centralized, again, like kind of from a device management perspective. So not just thinking about managing the people's devices actually within the building itself, but the infrastructure within the building. So temperature sensors, exactly, you know, door sensors, all those types of things, going back to a centralized management platform that supports all those different types of device capabilities with the right APIs that you can call on for those different specific types of applications. So that's our impact platform. The other thing as well is we're doing more advanced work, because obviously once you actually start to deploy a cellular-based system, particularly kind of on campus networks as well, whether it's inside the building or external as well. Right now, kind of with the current COVID pandemic, we do video analytics solutions as well for personnel temperature detection, mask detection, wearing, and hazard safety protection as well. So we can do a lot of work in terms of either physical building sensors or and security control systems for those physical premises, as well as video detection analysis as well. For personnel safety as well, and those types of activities.
So in terms of, we've heard a lot about IoT and all these devices that are sending information, and so it's fundamental to have that network there to be able to support all those IoT devices so that we can get the data from point A to point B. So yeah. Joe, from your standpoint then, what are some other use cases that need to be supported over that network?
So it's interesting right now, at scale, we are managing and monitoring about 35 to 40 different types of building systems. Everybody's familiar with the, you know, the BMS, BAS, the lighting control, security systems, access control. Those are all the ones that everybody has in their minds. But what you're seeing now is leak detection, touchless tech, being able to enter, you know, seamlessly without touching anything from the entrance all the way to your suite. We're seeing things like trash compactors, things like, you know, health scanners. There are so many other pieces, other devices that require some type of connectivity to the network. And that's what I'd say is sometimes if you don't really realize that you're in this paradigm shift, operationally, we're very linear in the way we approach things. We've got a problem, we find a cost-effective solution. That's the typical path of solving something in a building. I have this, I need to solve it, I need to do it in a budget, and so I do it. But in this particular case, there's a more fundamental, foundational aspect to it. If you don't get the network under control, if you don't have a dedicated building network, what you're going to end up with over time is piecemeal catch as catch can connectivity. We've gone into quite literally hundreds of buildings to do assessments, and you see, you know, some systems connected to the corporate IT network, some connected to a central network, some connected just straight out to the internet with port 80 open, totally unsecure. Yeah. And those all can be in the same building. And so if that's your start point, your foundation, you really are not in a position to sort of move with this shift that's going to happen over the next 5 to 7 years. You're in a sort of poor position that you're going to have to address it at some point. So we recognized 10 years ago there was this gap, and a lot of people call it the OT gap, where corporate IT sort of stops at the PMO. And then on the other side, you sort of have engineers who are more equipment focused, but there's really this need to monitor and manage and architect an enterprise class network that, I might add, is budget friendly. And we worked really hard in the early years to really boil down from a procedural and process standpoint to get a dedicated building network that can be implemented not all at once and not with a big CapEx number, but in a sort of phased approach, putting people on a path to centralization. And the way you do that is you really have to architect it a certain way. And then it's modular so that you can start with a need and solve for that need. And then as budgets allow over the subsequent years, over subsequent budget years, you can expand that and migrate systems onto it. And that's really, you have to do it that way if you're going to end with an enterprise class network that is actually delivering 99.999% uptime. It has to be done a certain way, or your foundational underpinning is just not there. And you can't, the path to a smart building is the same. The path to 5G is the same. It's the centralized infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think there's a lot of different networks. There's all the building networks. There's all the enterprise networks. There's the communications network. So Greg, from your standpoint, let's talk about some of the use cases you see, specifically from the communications network with the proliferation of mobile apps and the upcoming 5G, and people want more and more data, more and more connectivity. So what are the primary use cases that you see the requirement for this building network to support?
Well, I think, it's still early on. Let me take a step back. We're really at the physical layer, right? We're a builder and operator of, wireless networks and fiber infrastructure inside real estate. So that part of our business. So from a use case perspective, on the commercial real estate side, with the advent of COVID, I think a lot of building owners are looking at ways to deploy some of these platforms that are touchless. There's latency related needs as well. So from a private LTE perspective, I think that's going to evolve. There's not a lot of use cases right now that drive that within a commercial real estate building. At least we're seeing it more in industrial. We're seeing it in healthcare. We're seeing it in sports and entertainment from a private LTE perspective. On the 4G, 5G, 5G is going to come into the buildings. We're starting to have conversations with regards to use cases with regards to hubbing, for the mobile network operators who actually would need to aggregate traffic either in the building or outside the building for small cells. But so those things are evolving, and right now it's more of they still need to make a phone call, and that's 4G. But as handsets and everything else come out with 5G, the applications start to come out that are more wireless driven, with needing space, and needing more connectivity and more mobile operating, practices within the workspace itself. That's going to continue to escalate up as 5G moves into those buildings. But the other use case we see when we come into a building from an infrastructure perspective is, we manage all of the service providers that come into the building, all on the rooftop, who come into the meeting room to serve the tenants. And so from the building owner's perspective, the other use cases are, how do I lower my OpEx? I don't want to have to deal with all of this stuff. How do I increase my net operating income? How do I monetize the assets I have? But at the same time, so that's an important part that we play in that long term. We partner and we invest and use our own capital at times. But to Joe's point earlier is what we're seeing now is, and we need to push more is everybody needs to come to the table that brings their own unique skill sets and platforms and utilities to help the building owners to put together this one unified network in advance the first time versus piece parting it together. Everyone's coming in with their own stuff, and you start to look at it and say, wow, where could I actually driven some economic value here for the building owner? Where could I have leveraged someone else's infrastructure that was already there versus putting in a whole nother infrastructure and passing all those costs on to the tenants and the building owners. So
right,
those are
exactly.
some of the use cases and what we're seeing.
Yeah, and so Ron, you had talked a little bit about this in terms of the reduction of OpEx and CapEx, because if you've got 10 different networks in a building and 10 different gateways and 10 different communications means outside of the building, you've got 10 times the cost. So let's talk a little bit about how a converged network can help consolidate all that and significantly reduce both your CapEx and your OpEx costs.
Yeah, I mean, the way to look at that, and I'll give you a couple of case studies here, Darlene. We call that a spaghetti network, and the path to a spaghetti network is you take it to a converged network, right? Typically, a converged network is when you bring everything to a central switch, and now you've got everything converged at a switch, and you can control everything in and out of the building out of that switch. So what we do today is most customers have a spaghetti network because over 30 years, somebody deployed a elevator control system on the 8th floor, a lighting control system on the 5th floor, a BMS in the basement, an access control system somewhere else. Is there a way to create an overlay through software to be able to converge this, which is what we do. We converge it today without having to pull risers and cables, limiting that cost, telling the customer, whenever you do the retrofit of the building, converge it. And since we provide a managed service, we just take those edge gateways back from the customer. So it becomes a very seamless, it's like moving from Xfinity to Dish. Like, okay, just give back your box and now go to Dish and you're done. So that's one thing. The use cases that we're seeing most is the remote access piece. I mean, our entire portfolio of enterprise and REIT customers absolutely have understood the value of centralizing third-party remote access into the building. Because which technician from which vendor came in, what time, touched what application did they run, is there an audit trail available, will I pass my certification or not? And that basically is our operations cloud, which we do for all of them. And we're seeing that as the number one use case. We're seeing from a business perspective, the customers save close to about 76% in CapEx and OpEx when they leverage what we do. And that's the business insight, right? I mean, why would you do this then? And then you come to the return to work part. Once you're talking about return to work, again, right? You have people who want to deploy all kinds of edge applications at the edge. If you're going to deploy edge applications at the edge, everybody says, who's patching that gateway? Are you taking the responsibility when there's a Linux patch that comes out that they're going to patch your gateway? And that person, no, I'm not taking that responsibility. Suddenly you have 10 gateways which are unpatched in the building and disaster. And now you have, username, password, and everything's tossed out of the table. And the last thing that we're seeing is the digital twin vendors. Everything you guys see, you guys are doing on the handset for the smart building and all that good stuff. That also has an edge compute component, which requires to be run on a virtualized substrate. So we've got very, very large Fortune 1000 enterprises that basically are telling all the digital twin players, you have to run on this secure substrate because these people are willing to stand by the security of this and are willing to sign an SLA to do this. So which you're not, and your gateway is insecure. Because there's no way you can take the levels and levels of IT security and put it into an OT network overnight. It takes some expertise, and don't do it yourself is what I'll say.
Well, we've talked a little bit about some use cases and some value of having that single converged network. So Joe, let's talk a little bit about some of the concerns and risks, because I think the first question I always get is, what if the network goes down? And then everything goes down, right? So talk about some of the concerns and risks associated with having a single converged network in the building.
Yeah, so that's really the central, when you get past, how you get there, that's really the concern, right? If you have 8 different networks, some big, some small, and passing data out to the cloud, one of the problems that you've got is one of connectivity and uptime. And if one of those systems is a DSL line from 10 years ago, and another one is on fiber, and they're all using different pieces of equipment, what happens is that connectivity is very brittle. And when something happens to get connected to something because the guy needed a port and it was working and all of that crashes, that's where you don't have connectivity anymore. So when I talk about foundational is a number of things, but at the core of it is security and connectivity. When you talk enterprise class, it's a buzzword we use a lot, but it means something. It means that you're getting this 99.999% connectivity, but that's based on what you're doing foundationally in the building. So for example, you're getting not only redundant bandwidth for that network, but you're actually getting it from 2 separate diverse pathways within the building. So that if something happens on one, you've still got connectivity for all your building systems. You're architecting that network so that it's redundant, so that if this just happened the other day in a building we were doing an assessment on, contractor on the 7th floor needed an outlet, and he unplugged the existing VMS, what it turned out to be the switches, all daisy chained together up 45 floors, and took down everything just because he needed an outlet to do some TI work on the 7th floor. Those things really happen. And then on the security side, you've really got to have enterprise class means essentially what Ron's talking about, which is you've got to have some way of controlling remote access securely. The data is getting passed back and forth in a secure manner. And these systems, even though they're centralized, remain siloed and secure so that there's no way for somebody, malware or hacker, to jump from one to another. So as long as you're architecting that properly, you really do have the foundation so that when you need to go to the cloud, when you need actionable data, you're going to start doing what I would call the fancier elements that we're just really starting. We're on at the tip of the iceberg on. You then have a platform where that's going to happen, and it all comes down to process. I always tell people our change management document alone, what governs how we provision what we do, is 68 pages with flowcharts, and that ensures that the right decision, the right provisioning is made each time something new comes into the matrix.
So Ron, let's talk about that real quick. I always say it's better to have one secure network than 10 unsecure networks. And so what happens when the network goes down? Is there still the ability for each of the independent systems to run on premise, or does the network go down and everything goes down?
That is a very good point, Darlene, and we call this headless mode, right? Everything has to work headless mode. I mean, you cannot assume you're going to have connectivity all the time. So when you build this thing out with the virtualization layer at the edge, with the edge server having that capacity to be able to continually acquire data, it's not connected up to the internet. It's still acquiring the data. When the connection comes back, it'll be able to sync back up and send everything back up to the cloud. It's being able to, the entire building can run completely autonomously without having the connectivity that it needs, and still work and sync back up with the cloud-based technologies, etc., whenever it's needed. So everything, isolation, what Joe just said, we call that east-west hack proliferation. You have to assume that you will have a disgruntled employee. You want to take a USB stick, go into your elevator control system and shove it in and hack it because this person was disgruntled. Assume that's going to happen. Don't think, what if? It is going to happen. Now, if that is going to happen, how do you proliferate and make sure that hack doesn't go into the lighting control system, the BMS, the access control system, even though they're all on the same network? Are they all VLAN? Are they all segmented? Are they all isolated? All of that has to be thought through when you build this up. And of course, everything has to run headless, Darlene. And you can't assume that you're going to run only with the internet on.
So Jason, we keep talking about a little bit about edge computing. So for those in the audience who are not familiar with what that is, can you explain what is edge computing? And we also talk about the cloud. And so we got all these devices down here at the edge, and then we got the cloud out here in the ionosphere, right? So kind of put the pieces together between the edge devices and the cloud.
Yeah, sure. So if you think about normally like cloud computing, we've been very kind of conditioned to think about, centralized processing. So these big data centers, right, where all the information is held, the applications are held, and everything gets processed in very big data centers that are centrally located. So what we're starting to see now is with the different types of network technologies we build out, we can put those data centers effectively, we can make them smaller and smaller, and they're getting closer to the access technology. So they could go from the very centralized data centers to a regional smaller data center that might serve like a metroplex area. And now they're even getting to the point where you could have a data center that could be on a particular campus, like a building site campus or anything like that, to serve that campus area. And it could even go slightly smaller than that. So you could have, one server that's serving specific functions within a building within there. So that's how edge computing is starting to work. And you place the workloads, based on what compute functionality you're trying to do. So if you need a lot of information tiny bits of information. So like we were all talking earlier about building sensors, building management systems, and you needed that data very quickly, but it's small amounts of data. You would send that closer to the edge processing instead of sending it all the way back to the central cloud if you wanted it in real time. Similarly, if there was other workloads or other applications that didn't require that real-time processing, and it's just information you send like once or twice a day, you'd send that information to an application that was hosted in a centralized cloud. So it offers you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to where to hold that data. And obviously, if you have procedures and policies in place where you need to hold that data securely within your own campus grounds for security policy reasons, you could also do that as well. Make sure that that server is physically located on your premise. So it provides you a lot of flexibility there. And that, again, coupled with the access technology, like especially like in terms of wireless, I think people still tend to think, wireless technology is not being secure, but we've moved to a completely different paradigm now where you have that capability with both 4G and 5G, coupled with edge computing and the small cell technology within the buildings that provides that local processing with that security together to run those different types of systems across the campus wherever you need them.
Mm-hmm. So Greg, I want to go back to the conversation about ROI and asset value, because, from a real estate perspective, I think asset value is a primary business driver. How do I improve the asset value or increase the asset value of my property? And there's a lot of different types of verticals. There's commercial, corporate, hospitality, retail. There's so many different types of real estate. But from your perspective, how does investing in that network infrastructure help improve the asset value of the property?
Well, one, I think it's a lot of what we've been talking about here so far today. You've got the value from the eye of the beholder, so to speak. You've got tenants who are concerned about health. They're concerned about safety. They're interested in amenities. And so a lot of the basic infrastructure from a fiber perspective are coming into a building and making it a smart building. All of those things play into that, and that translates into some form of value, whether that be a rental increase or a longer term, rent, less churn with the tenants, reputation, things of that nature. Just the overall environment and experience of those tenants. So that kind of translates into value creation, in addition to attractiveness in the marketplace. When they're investing in 4G, 5G infrastructure, because most tenants today, if they've got an RFP or they're out searching for space, that's typically a line item on there now is what type of cellular coverage or wireless coverage is in the building, or what are you providing or plan to provide. Connectivity to various data centers, what fiber providers are in the building. Do you have any place for me to put my servers if I don't have space in my office? Do you have a micro data center or anything? Other companies look at it from a rooftop. Do you have access to the rooftop? Can you lease that out? Is there infrastructure to the rooftop? So, we said early on, or it was mentioned early on, like assessments. So, we go through a lot of the assessments of sitting down with the building owner and taking a look at all of those different aspects. Hubbing, can we use some of your unrentable space there and convert that to a micro edge data center or a hub that generates revenue for the venue? Is there a way for us to remove OpEx constraints from you and we'll manage all of the fiber providers coming in. We'll do legal contracting, compliance, certificates of liability, fire traps, a unified infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Taking a lot of those obligations and operational issues off of their hands, creates an increase in net operating income. They're no longer incurring that OpEx. It can offset that. And in return for a lot of that stuff, we generate revenue off of that and return that to the building owner as well. So there's various ways to look at the value and the cap rates, and as the value of the venue increases, it kind of proves itself out over time.
Where are you seeing the highest demand in terms of the type of real estate vertical? Is it typically, retail, hospitality, and where are you seeing the lowest demand?
From infrastructure, basically, or unified infrastructure?
Yeah, in terms of putting in a unified communications infrastructure.
Yeah, I would say the it'd be interesting to get Joe's perspective on this too, is we're seeing it in renovated commercial real estate, where they basically have a white, clean slate, or buildings coming out of the ground where it's they can capitalize it, and they're going in the first time, bringing everybody together. Those are some of the more popular ones. Or in commercial real estate where it's just kind of gotten out of control, and they just don't want to no longer manage it. They've got multiple providers coming in. They've got copper, they got fiber, they got all different types of stuff all over the place. The spaghetti bowl, or we call it like a bird's nest or whatever, just stuff everywhere. And then actually that starts taking up space, and then you can't actually overbuild from that. Areas that aren't as aggressive right now because of COVID would be hospitality. That's one of the areas that's suffering. Healthcare right now, it's tough to they're focused on with COVID, and they're filled up there, but they're also very interested in mobile coverage as well for first responders and things of that nature. So it all depends on the various verticals. We do a lot in sports and entertainment, big venues as well. Although there's not a lot going on in the venues are still moving forward with upgrading their infrastructure in preparation of things coming back to normal, or whatever that new normal is.
So that's a good segue. So Joe, have you seen a lot of difference in the implementation of networks in new buildings versus existing buildings, and what are some of the challenges you're seeing in existing buildings?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so new buildings, it's very interesting because new buildings coming out of the ground are still encountering this challenge. And the reason for that is a lot of those designs are 5 years old by the time the building comes out of the ground. We just went through this with a building in Seattle, and the design itself was set up to basically have a network for the BMS and maybe one other one for a couple of systems. Then this building comes out of the ground, and all of a sudden there are 17 different systems that need connectivity, and there's no plan or provisioning for that. And so that's sort of the gap we see on the new construction side, is we have to come in and kind of help the building design that central network to run all of these systems that suddenly cropped up in the last 5 years that really weren't contemplated when that building was designed. So that's one side of it. That's the new construction side. On the other side, what's really driving the existing construction, the brownfield buildings, is that so many different pieces are coming together. Every new thing, every health scanner, anything that's pandemic related, plus leak detection. Out here in California, seismic detection. You've got things like irrigation control. Who even contemplated that irrigation control would need connectivity, but of course it does now. Right. All of those use cases kind of come together to have these buildings throw up their hands and say, what do I do? How do I plan for this? Yeah. And that's really the start point that kind of kicks things off.
But even in a new building, you're almost having to do a retrofit at times.
You really are. Or a lot of times they'll catch it. They kind of see it all of a sudden, right as that building's starting to come out of the ground.
Wait a minute.
And then you're kind of on the fly getting in there.
Right. This isn't right. Yeah. So when we're connecting all these, whether they're IoT devices or networks or cloud, it's obviously a tremendous amount, terabytes of data coming out of those facilities. So Ron, can we I know we're running out of time here, but let's talk a little bit about the data security component of it. Where does all that data go, and how do you keep all that data secure? You got to turn on your mic.
Sorry, this is where you have the secure SD-WAN links, etc. All the IT methodologies that are used for what we call securing data at rest and securing data at motion. How do you filter data? There's no point in sending the room is at 76, the room is at 76, the room is at 76 every 30 seconds across the WAN. The only company that's going to benefit is the telco. They're going to make a lot of money out of that because you're just sending this thing. So instead, just send it when it's changing, how rapidly it's changing, etc. The other point I want to bring up, very interesting, in the previous comment that you mentioned earlier, we have customers that are catering to large pharmaceuticals that have labs in buildings doing COVID-19 research. And those labs are asking the building, is your building network secure? Because through that, I don't want somebody accessing the intellectual property of my vaccine development. So,
Mhm.
the tenant is standing up and saying, now, if you could put your hands on the fist and on the table and say, yes, the building is currently secure completely, that adds a significant value to the end customer for that reason. And another example, again, just driving to use cases, is in the new construction that you guys were all just talking about. We actually had one of the buildings in San Francisco completely remotely provisioned, a brand new building from the cloud without having technicians go in there because of the secure connectivity part, Darlene. The way people need to think about this is, why do you and I have health insurance? Why do you and I have life insurance? Because we fear the worst. Similarly, securing the building network is an investment somebody has to make, because if they don't, they're vulnerable to what the repercussions are later down the road.
Well, great. I think that's a great way to wrap up this conversation. I wish we had a couple more hours today, but one of the questions we were going to ask is, why is the industry so far behind in terms of deploying converged networks in buildings? But I think we're going to save that question for the happy hour this afternoon. So I know we've got some more great sessions coming up. I've got one coming up here at 2 o'clock about the next big things in digital workplace and integrated mobile apps. So please join us for that conversation coming up in about 15 minutes. And then we've got a keynote from Mark Ganzi this afternoon. And then I think we've got happy hour up on the rooftop at 4:45. So we will continue the conversation at the networking event at 4:45 on the rooftop. Hope to see you guys all there. Thank you so much for this great conversation about the building network, about making sure that we're looking at, reducing CapEx and OpEx, putting everything on a converged network, making sure we deal with the security components of it, Ron. And thank you so much for all your participation. We hope to see you in the Purple platform later this afternoon. Bye.